Now a reading from the book of Acts. In Jerusalem, Saul was still threatening the followers of Jesus by saying he would kill them. So he went to the high priest and asked him to write letters to the synagogues of the city of Damascus. Then if Saul found any followers of Christ's way, men or women, he would arrest them and bring them back to Jerusalem. So Saul headed towards Damascus. As he came near the city, a bright light from heaven suddenly flashed around him. Saul fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to him, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" Saul said, "Who are you?" The voice answered, "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. Get up now and go into the city. Someone there will tell you what you must do." And the people traveling with Saul stood there, but they said nothing. They heard the voice, but they saw no one. Saul got up from the ground and opened his eyes, but he could not see. So those with Saul took his hand and led him into Damascus. For 3 days Saul could not see and did not eat or drink. There was a disciple in Damascus named Ananias. Christ appeared to him in a vision, saying, "Ananias." Ananias said, "Here am I." Then Christ said to him, "Go at once to Straight Street, and at the house of Judah, ask for a certain Saul of Tarsus. He is there praying." Saul had a vision that a man named Ananias will come and lay hands on him so that he would recover his sight. But Ananias protested, "I have heard from many sources about Saul and all the harm that he has done to your holy people in Jerusalem. He is here now with authorization from the chief priest to arrest everybody who calls on your name." Christ said to Ananias, "Go anyway. Saul is the instrument I have chosen to bring my name to Gentiles, to rulers, and to the people of Israel. I myself will show him how much he will have to suffer in my name." So with that, Ananias left. When he entered the house, he laid his hands on Saul, saying, "Saul, my brother, I have been sent by Jesus Christ, who appeared to you on the way up here, to help you recover your sight and be filled with the Holy Spirit." Immediately, something like scales fell from Saul's eyes, and he regained his sight. He got up and was baptized, and his strength returned after he had eaten some food. Saul stayed with the believers in Damascus for a few days and soon began proclaiming in the synagogues that Jesus was the only begotten of God.
So I've been thinking about change. Specifically thinking about change in the way that one does in the spring in his mid-30s, when it's just finally starting to click that life really does run in seasons. When you think back on your life so far and begin to see both how you've been a completely different person and also how every single part of that journey has led you here and is still with you here. When you begin to realize that what really matters in life is the slow, gradual change, the act of becoming not just the caterpillar in the chrysalis, but also the moth who can fly higher and navigate better. Not just the flowers on the trees, but also the growth within the buds waiting through the winter. Not just the warmth of the sun, but every little tilt of the axis that brings it closer. I got home from work after midnight this past Easter Sunday, and I swear to you, standing on my back porch in the quiet night, I could feel the resurrection happening. Not springing from the tomb, but the stirring of cells, the twitching of the muscle structure, the knitting back together, the energy of life returning to life. I'm beginning to see how much of life is about that small, gradual advancement that you barely even notice. But we're not talking about that today. Today's passage is rather about the quick reversal, the sharp turn, the 180, the kind of change where 3 ghosts terrorize your dreams in the night and you stop being evil by morning, the kind of change where you go from nearly jumping off a bridge to screaming out greetings at random buildings, the kind of change where you're spending a quiet evening at home and then 12 dwarves and a wizard take you away to fight a dragon. That's the kind of stuff this story is made of. A quick, sudden, mystical experience and your entire life changes. And to be fair, this was a surprising turnaround for everyone involved. No one, including Saul himself, was expecting Saul, the guy who was just arresting and stoning followers of Jesus 1 chapter ago, not only to convert, but to become the Jesus movement's foremost evangelist. And no one saw that coming because we are not used to people actually changing. On that note, even though it did require an act of God or 3 or 4, I think it's commendable that Saul is open to change because we know now that not everybody is. One of the texts I read this week made a note that Saul didn't really have a choice but to change his mind when he saw for himself that Jesus was really alive, but I disagree. I think we have all learned recently that people are not only capable of, but actually quite skilled at refusing to change or grow in the face of evidence. It doesn't matter how much plain science and straight statistics and observable facts you show some people, they'll still find some reason not to believe in the truth. Because we all love the quick reversal so long as it's not happening to us. We don't want to change, we want everybody else to change to accommodate us in the way we'd like the world to be. And that's understandable because change is, after all, really hard. It doesn't happen easily because if things are easy, then there's nothing that needs to change. I think it's safe to say that if he hadn't had a vision and been blinded, then Saul probably would have continued being the same nasty persecutor of Jesus' followers he had always been, because it was working for him. You can't say he hadn't made a name for himself. I'm sure he was able to make himself comfortable as well with the gains he got from rounding up members of the Jesus movement. So if he hadn't had something difficult happen to him to make him change, then I doubt he would have. But he was forced to adjust the way he approached life because life changed the terms on him. And I think we tend to be the same. If things are going well, there's no real reason for us to change. It's only when life throws us a curveball that we learn how to hit a different kind of pitch. And that's another reason why we love this kind of quick reversal story. It's all wish fulfillment, based in our desire that everything can change for the better without us doing any of the work. The danger is that we love stories like Saul's so much that many of us in the church have become to believe that suddenly and completely is the only way a person can change, or the only acceptable way anyway. I know I've spoken about it before, but in the religious communities I grew up around, a complete turnaround was what was expected of you as a Christian, to confirm that you really had been saved. It was believed that salvation comes solely from accepting Christ, but it was also entirely possible to think you had genuinely accepted Christ and be wrong. As I've heard a million times, the belief was that you'd better know that you know that you know that you're saved. And how did you know? Well, it should be evident through the change in your demeanor and your actions, because after all, genuinely saved Christians don't sin, I was told. So if you're still saying curse words or drinking or masturbating or being gay, that probably means you weren't saved right the first time and you'd better do it again. Now, full disclosure, I myself do also have a bit of a born-again story. There wasn't much to it, really. I was at a revival when I was 14 and the preacher was talking and I just started thinking that I wanted to be better. So, of course, there was an altar call and I went up, and that was that. And despite the obvious shortcomings of this approach, I can't deny that it did kind of work. I mean, no one in that particular Southern Baptist church would still consider me to be a saved Christian, but nonetheless, here I am, not only still going to church and believing in God, but also in the pulpit. And I know that that journey to where I am now started in earnest on that exact day. But it would be wrong to say that I completely changed from that day forward. I tried really hard to. I started reading and studying the Bible and other religious texts more. I started going to church 3 times a week. I stopped saying curse words for a little while, but over time these things slipped. Which of course meant that the next time I found myself in a state of religious fervor, I convinced myself that the last time must have been a fluke. This would be the time I would really change forever and become a true, perfect Christian. And I said the same thing the time after that, and the time after that, and the time after that. I got saved 5 times in a year, and every single time I assumed I hadn't done it right the last time. And every single time it was less than a month before I was right back to where I started, doing all the things that had convinced me that I wasn't really saved anyway. One of the many bits of jargon one encounters when working in addiction recovery is the phrase pink clouding. Pink clouding happens in very early recovery. It's a period of time when you've been successful in the short term and you're beginning to celebrate that and everything begins to look wonderful. When pink clouding, it can be easy to start thinking that this is the way that life is going to be now. Everything is going to go great and you're going to feel amazing and confident and strong every day and things are never going to be hard again. And then, inevitably, things become hard again. And it can be easy to think that staying sober isn't worth it if you're still going to feel like this sometimes. So there's a real risk of cashing it all in because you spent too much time believing you were invincible in your sobriety. And I think the reason people so heavily emphasize this one-time, complete and perfect changed salvation is because it feels good, like that fluffy pink cloud. It feels great to have a couple weeks thinking that you're totally in control and you're a better person and God's going to help you achieve your every goal for the rest of your life and bless you every day so long as you don't slip up again. The problem is that great feeling doesn't last forever. Because the other thing that I forgot to mention is that being saved, accepting Christ, being forgiven of your sins, whatever you want to call it, is a one-time transaction in this worldview. If you were already saved, you'd better not sin again, because from that moment of salvation onward, you're responsible for everything you do. And one little sin can lead you into eternal damnation. And you don't want to put off being saved, because who knows when you're going to die? It could happen at any time. So to avoid eternal damnation, you have to A, be saved as soon as possible, and B, never, ever, ever sin again after you've saved. And that's it. Really simple. The obvious problem with that is that from the very beginning of our walk with God, it renders that faith journey into a course of sin management. Instead of learning how you can fit into God's wonderful design, instead of finding ways to help other people, instead of looking at the ways you can do on earth as is done in heaven, instead of any of that, you end up constantly scrutinizing yourself. You end up consumed with managing your own sin. And this emphasis on sinlessness just forces us to look inward with disgust at the precise moment we should be learning to look outward with wonder and with love. And if you're expected to be perfect from the moment you become a Christian until your last breath, then you're missing out on a lot of opportunity for growth. You're missing out on the possibility that you might be wrong, which means you can be better. In fact, you're basically giving up all hope of ever changing again, because changing either means you're no longer perfect and therefore going to hell, or that you weren't perfect in the first place, which means you were always going to hell, you just didn't know it before. But aside from that, aside from the many reasons why this theology does not foster good Christian growth, it's based upon a falsehood in the first place. Saul wasn't struck blind on the road to Damascus and immediately became a better Christian forever. It was a long process. He had a vision and then still had to finish getting to Damascus with the added hardship of not having his eyes. He spent 3 days fasting and still blinded, and I'm sure you can imagine all of the thoughts that would run through your head if you can't see and do nothing and don't eat for 3 days. And even after Ananias shows up, it doesn't mean that Saul was immediately transformed into this epic epistle writer we all have lots of feelings about. He most likely spent a year studying after this conversion experience, but that somehow always gets left out. But more importantly, Paul had to grow into the epic faith that we know him by. It took a long journey. It took shipwrecks and multiple imprisonments. It took trials and testimonies, and from every one of those experiences, Paul became a little wiser, a little stronger, a little more confident in his faith. It was Paul's entire life that shaped him into the man he became, and yes, that moment on the road to Damascus was probably the most consequential moment of his life, but it wasn't the only one. I think that's what I'm getting at. When I say I've been thinking about change, what I mean is I've been thinking about how I've changed and how glad I am to be where I am now. I spent years living in fear and anxiety about how to get it right, and I didn't ever start gaining momentum until I realized it's okay to get it wrong. That's what grace is for. I think about how scared I was when I was young that I would grow up and give up on my faith, and I am grateful that I haven't given up on God because she gave me time to grow into it. I think about how I used to spend days into weeks just trying to stop doing all the things I was told were sinful, and I like knowing that it's okay not to keep a budget of my own misdeeds. And I think about how wrong I was about so much, even when I thought I was in a state of Christian perfection. It's embarrassing to think of some of the things I said and did and believed, but also being embarrassed is proof that I've gotten better, and I appreciate knowing that I've grown and learned. And that's what it's really about. I'm not here today to tell anyone they're doing salvation or conversion wrong. I'm not here to tell you what to believe about grace and salvation, and I'm not trying to scorn anyone for having a different experience of salvation than mine. But I am here to say that no one should miss out on the act of becoming. Slowly and unnoticeably. You shouldn't miss out on thinking to yourself and realizing what a different person you once were and appreciating that person for bringing you to who you are now. And you shouldn't miss out on any of the long, slow changes that are part of becoming who you are as a Christian, because more often than not, those are the ones that stick.